In some of my older videos turning the dinosaurs accurate in the Jurassic franchise, some of you were a bit upset that I didn't turn the hybrids accurate as well. I mean, realistically, what could you do for the Indominus aside from an upscaled Allosaurus Anax? But I get it, things would just be unfair to have something that strong, so I'll fix that mistake by putting an accurate Indoraptor in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, the last Jurassic World movie that was a 7 out of 10 or above. The Indoraptor was truly a menace and the only dinosaur we've seen smile, like actually smile in a sinister manner, before killing a person in the most nefarious way possible. And even before his release, the guy had earned a bad rap at the institution they held him at, but who could blame him, considering how badly they treated him. But given that the Indoraptor is in fact a hyper-intelligent animal, with a combination of many other dinosaurs and even present ones, would the movie play out as it did if an accurate version was in the film? Well, we're about to see. By the way, this video is up because of a poll in the Discord, where everyone voted, so if you want to join, link's gonna be in the description. Now, there are a few animals that could possibly fit the Indoraptor's description, believe it or not. And Allosaurus fragilis wouldn't be too bad since on average they were below 2 tons, but they lacked the forearm strength and likely couldn't even walk on all fours if they wanted to. But then I remember that nature actually produced not just one dinosaur, but an entire family that's basically the Indoraptor, regardless of size, and possibly even more terrifying in some aspects. I'm of course talking about the Megaraptors, a group of sickle-clawed menaces that were the Freddy Kruegers of their day. And despite the name, these guys are not closely related to dromaeosaurs or true raptors per se. As a matter of fact, it isn't really known 100% where they branch into in terms of theropods. They came in different shapes and sizes, with the most popular and largest being Maip Macrosaurus, a 3 to 5 ton animal that was 8 to 9 meters and terrorized Cretaceous South America. But this would be way too big, so instead, let me introduce you to one of the more underrated species. Well, it's underrated if you don't play past the Titans, the Erosteon. I hope I didn't butcher that. Originally, this thing was classified as some sort of Carcharodontosaur, even in older documentaries like Dinosaur Planet. Who remembers this show, by the way? I remember binge watching entire episodes on YouTube or some pirated sites when I was a kid. Some of the episodes were a bit weird, considering how some dinosaurs were portrayed, but never as weird as Brenda, who was always 3 miles away on the illegal site, and I knew everyone in the neighborhood. In Dinosaur Planet, Erosteon is a massive Carcharodontosaur that would one-tap sauropods, but since then it has been re-evaluated and correctly placed in, well, its correct family. However, its size is now 7 to 8 meters and somewhere between 1.2 and possibly 2 tons, which makes it almost the perfect size for the Indoraptor. And like a lot of its family, it had very long hands that could grant it the ability to go on all fours if it needed to for some reason, although it was almost exclusively biped. The only major differences between this thing and the Indoraptor physically would be the head shape. Erosteon didn't have a wide bulbous head with exposed teeth. Instead, it was more narrow and covered, and they weren't really meant for crushing, more so for ripping and tearing, or as some suggest, holding prey in place so the claws could do most of the damage, which is a bit strange, since it's usually the opposite with theropods that have decent sized arms, but I guess it somewhat makes sense considering how much larger their arms are in comparison to their body. Although this isn't 100% accepted and some disputed, but I think this should be enough of a rundown for now. Any other facts will be mentioned during the video when we discuss how it's going to do in Fallen Kingdom, so let's get into it. Even though it isn't a hybrid, it likely would have gotten the same treatment as the Indoraptor, and possibly is the first real attempt of making an animal Hoskins wanted for war. So this specific Erosteon would be put through multiple trials and tests in order to find out the strengths and weaknesses. So just like the Indoraptor, this specific Erosteon is a prototype that is meant to be killed off or abandoned once production of the better models are being made. Like the hybrid, the Erosteon would be tested on all the time and forced to do certain tasks, including the laser training. It takes a lot of mental strain or just straight up absurd amounts of abuse to break an animal's mind to the point where they completely put off their own survival just to complete that task. I know police dogs and so go through training that allows them to do their jobs, but they have more time and it's a gradual thing that usually doesn't involve seriously stressing or physically harming the animal, compared to the Indoraptor, who was less than 2 years old and was electrocuted to get some desirable responses. Even though the Megaraptor wouldn't have the high intelligence of the Indoraptor, it would recognize a pattern and view humans as something to despise. When it comes to intelligence, not much is known on Erosteon. It had a relatively large brain for its size, and if we compare it to things like Maip, its intelligence was decent, able to set up hunts and assess what's optimal for hunting and what's not. This brings me into a cutscene that didn't make it into the movie but is supposedly canon, or at least soft canon, which was the hybrid playing with the skull of a person. This was the skull of an electrician that came in to fix a light the Indoraptor purposely broke in order to get someone into the cell, and after he faked being tranked out, he killed the guy. And after that, he was just left in complete darkness until he was ready to be shown. Sad to say, but the electrician is coming out alive with this one, well, the Megaraptor. Even though it likely had very tough skin with engine's modifications, I don't think it would purposely fake being asleep at that very moment or even think of breaking the light bulb in the first place. However, like almost all animals that are isolated and abused, it's gonna have a myriad of psychological issues, and even if put with another Erosteon all of a sudden, it would likely lash out. The only thing it likely had contact with is the food, or possibly, and ever so possibly, Macy, who may have visited it and formed some sort of bond, or at the very least, it didn't view her as an immediate threat like everyone else. Eventually, when it's time to be showed off, nothing would change. They'd prod the animal and electrocute it to get a reaction, and do the laser pointing thing. Is it possible for an animal less intelligent than a made-up hybrid to be on point for a single command? Absolutely. This was a theropod in the later Cretaceous, and its family is decently smart, around the same intelligence of an average bird. That's vague. I'd say more close to some raptors. So with enough abuse and testing, yes, I do believe it would be responsive to the lasers. It may show some sort of interest in Macy like the Indoraptor, but it wouldn't just reach out and brush her hair. It might recognize her scent or something and make a noise, which would make Macy jump back in surprise, assuming they cut off access to the animal after it reached a certain time, which is why Macy didn't recognize the Indoraptor up until now. Or perhaps she just never met it before as implied. Remember, these are mostly series. So even with an accurate animal being placed instead of the hybrid, most things stayed the same, aside from the electrician's death. However, this is where things start to change. After being tranked out, like if a proper dose was injected into it, nothing's gonna happen to the guard collecting the teeth. But for the sake of plot and this video being a bit longer, let's say the full dose wasn't injected or the dart landed on the more sick part of the body. If you're wondering if this would change anything, yes, it would. And it's a danger some wildlife vets have to go through all the time. Sometimes when animals like rhinos or even lions are darted for multiple reasons, maybe a checkup for a poacher's wound or just relocation, the full dose of the narcotic may have not been implemented and the animal wakes up early. Also, even after the dart, an additional anesthetic is given to keep the animal down. But this guy of course does not have an additional anesthetic to keep the Erosteon asleep. So let's say after some minutes of struggling to get the tooth out, it wakes up. At first it may bolt back and be confused, but so will the guard, and he's gonna have a heart attack. And if the heart attack doesn't kill him, rows of serrated teeth will. There won't be any teasing or fear mongering like with the Indoraptor. The Erosteon, after catching itself, will just rush forward and maul him to death. When I did look this up, the chances of an incomplete dosage is surprisingly higher than I thought for an animal. There's like a 2 to 3 chance after 10 of this happening, but this is general. Depending on the animal and other factors, these stats may vary. So for the sake of this video, let's say the Megaraptor falls within the 20 to 30% chance of this happening. After more than likely being starved while in its cell, it's gonna start eating the guard, while the few business folk in the elevator discreetly try to escape. But of course, this lady screams. I have never understood this, by the way. She's like Amanda from Jurassic Park, but without the plot armor. Realistically, who the hell screams after seeing something horrific? I know most people, including myself, just freeze out of fear or panic and sometimes hold our breaths to make as little noise as possible. If you want the lore as to what situation I was in that caused me to do this when I was younger, I'll tell you in an analog horror video I'm doing this week, so stay tuned. Anyway, after the fool screams, the Megaraptor is gonna come in hot like the Indoraptor, and just like the hybrid, the tail is gonna hit the elevator box and cause it to malfunction. Could it have been deliberate? Yeah, I guess, but gun to my abdomen, I'd say no. Since it is a bit bigger than the Indoraptor, it would have the ability to wipe out those people in the elevator. Not because it will politely go from person to person, but because the stimulation of all these targets moving will lead to a chase with everyone. So like if it's halfway into mauling one person and someone runs beside it trying to escape, it's then gonna jump to that person, even if the previous person isn't dead yet. So something like the Scorpius Rex, but not as extreme. Now when it comes to the scene where Owen, Claire and Macy are trapped with it, things play out, well, a bit different. Unlike the Indoraptor, it would be upright most of the time and would climb on top of the track skull more than likely. It would definitely be able to track them with smell like the hybrids though. Although there hasn't been too much studies on their sense of smell, the few information I found suggests that they had a very acute sense of smell, so it most definitely would be able to track them, and the moment the walkie-talkie goes off and it turns around the corner, it's gonna see them. Now this animal likely had a top speed of 20 miles per hour, or a bit more, so the pacing would be somewhat similar in terms of a chase scene, up until it escapes onto the roof or outside. It likely did have the power required to pull itself up, but if there's a safer way, I think it would take it. Now this is where the movie will would end realistically. There are very rare cases of animals choosing revenge or held a grudge towards a specific target. Usually it's the most intelligent things like elephants or corvids, both of which are smarter than the Megaraptor. There are a few cases of things like a tiger going back to find the hunter who shot them, and then murking them in their own home, but that's extremely rare. So it's very likely that it will just run off into the woods from here and terrorize some other unfortunate animal until it's caught again. But let's say for whatever reason it has some sort of familiarity with Maisie and ends up in the room. It won't just slowly beckon over her, but likely stand at the edge of the bed in curiosity until Owen pops in. Originally I was thinking it's dead here since real animals can't survive bullets like the monsters in this franchise, but then I looked up the gun Owen had, the SIG SG-552. Wait, yep, I think that's it. Look, this is what I found. If it's the wrong gun, please let me know, but from what I found, the power behind this gun isn't enough to take down something similar in size to a 2-ton Rhino if it's a body shot or two, and the Erostion is around the weight of that, so it will be dazed but not dead unless Owen gets a headshot. And as for Blue coming in, well, she's gonna get killed. Even though she can effectively take on targets bigger than her for a while, eventually she's gonna get hurt. And unlike the Indoraptor, I don't think the Erostion would just leave her to go for the humans if she's on the floor. It's likely gonna rip her up, but in the process it's gonna get torn into itself. So with bullet holes and serious injuries from a crack raptor, I'm gonna say that this thing is gonna just lie there or move to somewhere more secluded. But again, let's push the realm of possibility and say it goes back for the humans. What's gonna happen? Well, it's a few hundred kilos bigger than the Indoraptor, so the glass wouldn't take its weight and the first crack would make it pull back. And when clear points and the Megaraptor misses, it's falling to its death. It may be strong, but it's likely got less durability than the Indoraptor and upper body strength pound for pound. So with it being very injured already, it likely wouldn't be able to pull itself back up. So it would splat down on the floor and die. And folks, that's what's gonna happen if the Indoraptor was replaced with Erostion. This time Blue likely died, but realistically, without me adding in more rare scenarios for the video's length, this thing wouldn't even have escaped. There's like a 30% chance of it roughly waking up early due to a light dosage, but we skipped that because it actually can happen, and instead I made it somehow decide to go for Maisie. Like 8 or 9 times out of 10, that thing is gonna just try to escape into an open area outside and run off. And actually now that I look at it, even if it made it into Maisie's room, there's a chance of it killing Owen, since a lot of animals when they're shot by hunters such as Cape buffalo or brown bears will charge at a hunter if a critical hit isn't made at close range, so there won't be a stall like the Indoraptor. Owen's getting mauled before Blue comes in, but when Blue comes in, Maisie's gonna escape, and after killing Blue, it's just gonna lay there or try to find somewhere else to hide. But like I said, it likely wouldn't come to that. 7 times out of 10, it's gonna stay in the cage, and even if it escapes, it's just gonna go into the woods until it gets recaptured. So more than likely, it's gonna taste freedom for a while, and then, you know, get recaptured later on, and then put down. There's just a lot of scenarios that could happen, since it's a real animal, and doesn't have complex thinking like the Indoraptor that can willingly trick and outsmart humans, nor does it have the malicious intent to actually enjoy doing it like the hybrid. So more often than not, it's staying in the cage or at worst, running free outside when it escapes. But if we put the rarest or worst case scenarios into place, Blue likely dies and it falls to its death when it can't pull itself up. But let me know what you think. How do you think the story would play out if Erostion was placed there instead of the vengeful hybrid? Let me know in the comments. But that's all for now folks, I'll see you tomorrow.